the local Grange Hall, currently houses the Andover Historical Museum, which is located on Monument Road off of Hebron Road. Built around 1892, it had an elevated stage where town officials held small meetings and sat and listened to local townspeople. In the early 1960s, local productions such as Belle of the West and Pastry Cook and the Pirate were performed on the stage. A 2x4 wall was built at the left end of the stage and now resides Andover's historic timeline murals, which started in the year 1600 up until the present. Incidentally, the murals were created and drawn by Vicki Wallace and Bob Berkston. In the main area of the building holds historic pictures, documents, and crafts separated into categories such as Andover's railroad, local schools, early fire departments, and of course the lake, just to name a few items. In 1910, this portion of the building was added and used as a dining room. It also had its own kitchen where food was prepared for the dining area. This now is the actual museum holding different room items such as bedroom, kitchen, and other tools and artifacts of the 18th and 19th century period. Scott Yeomans, the town's historian, put this wonderful museum together. Being a lifelong resident, there is no one that knows more about the town than he does. So what would be more appropriate than to listen of Scott's family tree?
This is Myron Parker Yeomans. He's really the reason that the Yeomanses came to Andover. He was born on a farm up in Columbia. He decided he didn't like farming, though. He didn't like animals very much, especially horses. So he decided to become a lawyer. He moved to Andover down to the center to be next to the railroad station so that he could go around and practice his profession without having to ride horses too awful much. He was also a member of the legislature in 1875. That was the year which they voted in New Haven to do away with New Haven as a co-capital for the Connecticut. His wife, Marion Adeline Cheney, her family owned the farm that is now Andover Lake. It was called Cheney Hollow for a number of years. It was pretty much farmland and swampland at that point in time. She had one brother who died during the Civil War, and that was pretty much the end of the Cheneys in Andover. Their son, Judge Edward Myron Yeomans, was the next generation down. He was active in many, many things. He was the first librarian of the Andover Public Library. He was instrumental in starting the Andover Lake Corporation, putting up the money for the initial surveys and so forth, and pretty much had his hand in just about everything in town. His wife, Gertrude Hutchins Yeomans, was another Columbia person, came here from Columbia. She had one son, my grandfather, John Hutchins Yeomans, and then died with her next pregnancy. Probably something that would fairly simply been cured today, but ended up taking her life. My grandfather, John Hutchins Yeomans, spent over 60 years on the Board of Finance for the town of Andover, was on the Regional District 8 board that built Ram High School, and again was involved in many, many things in the town of Andover. And down here is Bissell Post with my grandfather, John Yeomans, as a child. Bissell ran the large sawmill that was down on Saddle Brook, pretty much the area that we use to celebrate the Memorial Day services these days. This is another picture of Gertrude Hutchins. She is in a bridesmaid's dress there for her brother's wedding. This is Edward Myron Yeomans again, and what he's doing is every Sunday, good Yankees would take out the coal ash from their stove for heating the house during the winter, and they'd take it out and they'd sift it. And he's sifting coal ash in his vest and coat and so forth to get the small nuggets that it didn't burn thoroughly and take them and put them back in the coal stove again. Good thrifty Yankees. This is Marion Cheney again. This is a photograph taken on her 15th birthday. It was basically illustrating the type of clothing and stuff that a young girl would wear at that point in time. Rather formal portrait, but certainly indicative of the dress of the time. And this is just another one of some family. This is Rachel Stanley and her father, Henry. Henry was the brother of Gertrude Hutchins. Rachel, of course, came to Andover, married Howard Stanley, and spent her life here being very active in many things. All right, Originally, the land that Andover incorporates came from a number of land grants given by the Sachem Joshua to various groups of gentlemen, one group from Saybrook, one group from Hartford, and this was actually a purchase in 1692 called the 5 Mile Purchase, eventually became Lebanon. The group of men from Saybrook incorporated the town of Hebron eventually with some additional lands. The town of Lebanon was incorporated out of mostly the 5 Mile Purchase in 1700. And the town of Coventry was later incorporated out of the land granted to the men from Hartford. This little section of land called the 1 1/4 miles was not in any town. That was reserved by the Sachem Joshua for his children, his sons specifically. Eventually that was sold off in parts by those children to various settlers, but it remained outside of the town bounds for a number of years. Eventually that caused some problems because there was no civil authority over that particular area, and the people from Lebanon thought their neighbors to the north were getting an unfair advantage, so they petitioned and the boundary for Lebanon was moved up to the Hop River. We still had this portion below Coventry that was not part of any town. Similar problems came along and eventually Coventry petitioned and their bound was moved down to Hop River as well. So now we have the area that Andover was in that's sitting in Hebron, Lebanon, and Coventry. In 1790, there was talk of taking the Crank Society, or the Second Society in Lebanon, and turning that into a town, which eventually became Columbia. And those people living in Andover society were concerned that they were going to have this large gap between Lebanon proper and their section of Lebanon, so they petitioned to become part of Hebron, and eventually that was successful. So therefore, that portion of Andover society that was in Lebanon got annexed to the town of Hebron. Next thing to happen in the area is the town of Columbia was incorporated from lands from Lebanon, and ultimately in 1848 Andover took lands from Hebron and Coventry. Various petitions along the way, as we have the petition in 1747 to become a distinct society. It was an ecclesiastical society or church society. They had started petitioning in 1743. And this petition is the successful one that finally arrived at the legislature in 1747. At this point, it was called the General Court because, of course, there was no United States at this point. This is the act actually creating the Andover Ecclesiastical Society. No sooner had Andover Ecclesiastical Society been established than, of course, people started petitioning to not be part of that. And this is a petition from 3 individuals living very close to what today is Coventry, petitioning to be moved out of the Andover Ecclesiastical Society and put back with Coventry. Mostly those are people on the backside of Bunker Hill Road. In 1747, also the town of Coventry petitioned to have our bounds changed. They weren't happy with the amount of land that we had taken to be included in the Ecclesiastical Society. Those people and that land that was taken to become the Andover Ecclesiastical Society would no longer be available to the churches of Coventry for taxes that were levied to pay for their ministry and the upkeep of their building, which again, we wouldn't think today to pay taxes to a church, but in those days, that's what you did. One of the first things an ecclesiastical society had to do was find a place to build a meeting house. And the legislature sent out a committee, and they plunked a stake on John Sims' land, which is very near the intersection of Boston Hill Road and Route 316 today. But being a crotchety old fool, he didn't want a church or a meeting house built on his property. He thought it would be very much to the disturbance of the peace to have such a building in his land. But along came Aaron Phelps and said, no problem, I'll give you land right on the other side of what today is Boston Hill Road. And not only will I give you land to build a meeting house on, I'll include enough land to have a parade grounds for the military to practice on and things as well. That's how the first meeting house in the town of Andover became built next to the Phelps residence. As early as 1754, the Ecclesiastical Society started petitioning for township privileges. Obviously, it took quite a while because it wasn't until 1848, 90-some years later, that we actually became a town, but we did start asking for those privileges in 1754. As an example of the problems in becoming a town, these are a couple of petitions from Hebron and Coventry in 1787, describing their displeasure and their wishes that Andover not be allowed to become a town. Again, they're concerned about loss of tax revenue. If Andover was to become its own town, they wouldn't have our people paying taxes into their coffers. Here we have a map from 1846 that if you focus in on the part where Andover is today, you will not find an Andover. You will again find the Coventry, Columbia, and Hebron in that area. This map shows the boundaries in 1846 as they were before Andover became incorporated. And again, you'll find Andover's lands being part of Coventry and Hebron. Here we have the act incorporating Andover as a town in 1848 and the initial assignments of selectmen's, assessors, board of relief, constables, tithing men, hay viewer, fence viewers, gauger, wood measurer, and so forth. And here we have a list of the state legislature representatives up through 1848. Early on, our town did have one representative from the town that went to the legislature each year.
Vicki Wallace, a former teacher, not only helps out with Andover's playgroup, but is also a tour guide for the museum. We'll be checking with her periodically for her points of interest.
We have 2 anniversaries that we are celebrating that gave us the idea for the museum. It's the 250th anniversary for the church, and it's the 150th anniversary for the town. And because of that, we thought the Historical Society thought it would be really good to have a wonderful museum of, that would remind all the people from Andover of all the people that were here long ago and what they did in old Andover. Also, we have things from the kitchen first, and I'm starting at the kitchen here. We have some utensils that are wonderful, that the kids all guess are plastic, but they are indeed bone, and it's kind of fun for the people to look at these. And this museum is a real hands-on museum, which the children love. They love to touch all this, and it really helps them realize, helps them with things from long ago. So these are made of bone, and we also have a new thing that we just got that is, and I have sometimes the kids guess what these things are, but this one is kind of hard. This is a button hook, and it's also got the bone handle. So we're real excited about getting this. We just got this in. We have a lot of cooking stuff here. This is something else that's kind of hard. It's the kids guess, but it is a popcorn popper. And we have a lot of items that you'd find in the kitchen. The kids walk around and touch stuff a lot, and they like to do that. We have an apple cutter. We have, let's see, they like this too. They like doing this one too. A beater, they like doing that. And then if you move over here, we have a lot of pots and pans and all the things. Now, this isn't a true cooking, this is not a true fireplace, but for our purposes, we're able to use it. They actually cooked in the fireplaces 250 years ago. So.
The railroad played a very important part in the economic development of Andover's town. Besides passenger service to Providence, Rhode Island, and up to Brewster, New York, there would be, around in 1849, freight service that would carry supplies into town for many businesses in Andover, such as carriage factories, sawmills, hat factories, paper mills, blacksmith shops. Just to name a few, shipping out their finished products further and faster than before.
Here we have an arrangement of photographs of the railroad activity in town. The railroad was being put through the center of town the same year that the town was incorporated, 1848. First train actually came through in 1849. No particular order here. We have a photograph of a derrick that came through. We have a number of wrecks in towns, cleaned up generally by steam derricks. Here we have the Comet, which was the early version of a swift bullet type train. It was supposed to go 110 miles an hour between Boston and New York. It came to Andover when it was on its inspection tour, and here we have the elementary school children getting to view it. Later times, after Route 6 had been built back down along the bank, instead of crossing the railroad tracks, we just had a modern diesel train coming through. The station had been long since closed. This is the back side of the station, looking from what at that point in time was the main road, Route 6. This is now Center Street. Photograph of the front of the station with the railroad tracks going by. You can see the crossing here where the main road crossed. The tracks came up and went down what again is Center Street. We have an old passenger train waiting at the station to pick up passengers about 1920. Here we have a photograph of a wreck that happened probably right across from what now is Merritt Valley Road and Merritt Valley Road and Lake Road intersection down in the woods. I think of the name of the people's houses there. Hoisington. This is the Hoisington house in the background here. These would be basically Irish laborers that were fixing the track and trying to clean up to get the line through. The line that came through Andover was a single track line, which means all the trains had no places other than basically at stations that they could pass each other. And when you had as many as 40 to 50 trains a day coming through, Andover was a very busy place, and a number of wrecks because of it. And we have an early freight train waiting at the station to head westbound here. This was taken about 1900.
Remnants of the old railroad can still be seen scattered about the town. This old abandoned route is located running parallel with Merritt Valley Road. It leads to Willimantic and eventually would head east to Providence. The rails and ties have been removed, but there still are traces of ties here and there. I can picture in my mind this overpass on Merritt Valley Road as children and adults alike standing below, covering their ears, listening and feeling the rumble as the engine and cars passed overhead. This trestle, located on the corner of Route 316 and Route 6, was recently disassembled with some of the rectangle stone blocks placed at the base of the War Memorial on the corner of Hebron Road and Route 6. In 1992, all of the town's War Memorial stones were relocated from their scattered locations to a plot on the intersection of Route 6 and Hebron Road. These stones depict the Andover residents who fought and fell defending our country from the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the Vietnam War, both World Wars, the Korean conflict.
Okay, this first photograph shows the center of town about 1900, looking down from Bear Swamp Road, looking up at what I call Bingham's Hill, because the Binghams owned it as a farm. You can see it was all cleared at that time. Most of Andover was cleared off. Logs had all been hauled away by the railroad. Farmers had made a lot of money in logging. We've got the Congregational Church, the Conference House. This is the graveyard. The road coming up along here, which is now Lower Center Street when you get up into this area. You had the hotel, which has now been replaced by a couple of houses. The barn that was next to the 1903 schoolhouse. This house is the elite residence now, it's still there. The old firehouse. And then the road came on down to what is now Route 316. This again being Bingham's Hill. Here we have a view looking down what is today Lower Center Street, right where Route 6 would have been or was at the time of this photograph. The hotel being on the right, the Hebron Road would have gone up here to this side of the hotel. That's now the upper side of Center Street. The railroad station is here, and again the houses and the old firehouse that still exist on the street are there. This is right about where the road ends now and heads up to the upper side. This photograph is looking down on the center again. This time it's from Bunker Hill Road. And you can see that at this point in time we had two churches in town. We had the Baptist Church and the Congregational Church. The Baptist Church was located on the lot that was the commuter parking lot until very recently. It's directly across the street from the building we're in here. Various farms. This was the Regan House, recently burned. Was the house that had the first meeting of the Andover Ecclesiastical Society in it. Up above we have a close-up of the old hotel. Stood right across from the railroad station. Was in business from about the time the railroad was put through in 1848 up until it burned October 1916. Another shot looking down Bunker Hill Road. This is mostly here for the well sweep that was here. This is how most of people in the area got water out of their wells. They had a counterweight and a long pole that would push the bucket down into the water, and then they just pull it back up. Again, you can see the church steeples in the background. This is the house, it was Alice Moe's house, and it's now owned by Peter Yeomans. Back here to the center again, this is looking down from Bingham's Hill. Bear Swamp will be up here in the back. This is after the hotel burns. This is sometime after October 1916, but it gives a real nice shot of the railroad station.
This is an old typewriter that was invented in the 1900s, and the kids liked using it at the museum, and we're lucky that it still works, but it's a little sticky. We also have an old Victrola, and it was built in 1890s, and you wind up the side first. And then you get the record spinning. Oops, today's. You play it like this.
Here we have a map of Bolton and Andover. It came out of an atlas that was done in 1856 showing the 4 school districts that Andover had. This is back when you had district schools that were all one-room schools. Grades 1 through 8 all went to the same school, each of the districts. Andover was actually the first town in the state to consolidate their schools, which would mean taking all the grades 1 through 4 and putting them in one place, and all the grades 5 through 8 and putting them someplace else. But at the time, we had the 4 districts prior to 1888. We had a school, one-room schoolhouse up on Long Hill Road. We had one down on Burnett Brook Road, actually out closer to Route 6. It's the only one-room schoolhouse that still exists in town in any way, shape, or form. It's now a private residence. There was also one down on Townsend Road, down by the brook, and there was one at the intersection of, at that time, it was the main road, Route 6 and Lake Road. Now it's Merritt Valley Road and Lake Road. The top photograph here was the Northwest District School, which is out on Route 6 at the intersection of Burnett Brook Road. It's the only building that's still left in town. It's been moved back towards the railroad, away from its original site, and Leonard Peralt now uses that as his home. This building at the intersection of Lake Road and Merritt Valley Road, it was there up until probably the late 1970s, at which time it was dismantled and taken away to a museum, much like Sturbridge Village and so forth. This building, the conference house down at the Congregational Church, is included here because in 1888, when the town consolidated its schools, the upper grades, I believe it was, were taken here. The town rented this building for $20 a year to be used as a school. It was also used as a town library when that was begun. Ultimately, the school population dropped to the point where all grades 1 through 8 went to this building up until 1903, at which time they built the 2-room schoolhouse up on Center Street. This building also still exists. It was originally built as a 2-room school. You went in this one door, then there were doors behind these windows to go in. Later on, 1927, they added a 3rd room. The building ended up looking like this. In 1946, there was talk of adding a 4th room because the population had expanded. It was decided at that point not to bother, that they would build a new school altogether. They built the original 4-room brick schoolhouse. That's the old portion of the current elementary school. Percy Cook donated the land. The town appropriated a little over $100,000 and built a nice new brick school. This is opening day, where the children were heading off to their get their desks. And in the 1960s, I believe it was, they added the first edition, which is what this is showing. Doris Chamberlain, she came to town in 1943 as a teacher principal, was very active in getting the new elementary school built. and remained there mostly as a principal until 1971 when she retired after having served the town for 28 years.
These are the schools which the children and young adults currently attend. The first, Andover Elementary School, located on School Road. The original school was built in 1948, consisting of 4 rooms. Later, upgrading and additions were made to keep up with the needs of the expanding town young population, such as adding a library and 2 classrooms in the basement, building a wing to include a main office, more classrooms, a health room, and more. Thirdly, another section was built to add even more classrooms and a brand new library. The final effort was to add a gymnasium and a music room. Ram High School sits alongside the middle school on Wall Street in Hebron. The middle school, or junior high, was built in 1980. Both schools accommodate children from regions Hebron, Andover, and Marlboro, hence the name Ram Middle and Ram High School. The First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ on Route 6 in Andover, celebrated its 250th anniversary in 1997, and because an area could not become a town unless it was first an ecclesiastical society, we can say that this church is a direct reason why our town exists today. So what could be more appropriate to our celebration of 150 years as a town as to include the Congregational Church's 250th birthday as well? This is the Reverend Gregory Kendall. He came to Andover Church in 1989 and is presently pastor of the congregation. Reverend Kendall had held ministries in Broadbrook and Southport, Connecticut. He came to Andover from the First Church of Christ in Bradford, Massachusetts. Reverend Kendall.
The beginning of the church in the town of Andover goes hand in hand with the beginning of the community itself. Our historical data takes us back to April 27, 1743, when the first petition was submitted to the General Assembly requesting to have the formation of the town of Andover and the ecclesiastical society, who were the members of, or the town fathers of any community. That petition was denied along with many others that were submitted until the year 1747, May 14th to be exact, when the petition was granted for the town of Andover to form its ecclesiastical society. From that beginning, the church, the community had 2 major purposes. Number 1, to build a meeting house, and number 2, to call a resident pastor to come and serve this community. Both goals were accomplished in the year 1748. The first meeting house was erected on Hebron Road, and the Reverend Samuel Lockwood was called to serve as the pastor of the church. That first meeting house served as a place of worship until the year 1833, when the present structure was built. This church, the sanctuary itself, has not undergone major changes from the very beginning, with a few exceptions. The enlargement of this building, the building also of Sunday school rooms and offices, and eventually completing the task of the fellowship hall or the parish hall, where presently we hold most of our suppers and other meetings. The pew numbers are the same ones, with the exception of the new ones that were added, as I said, in the 1950s. The windows were arched, but they were made of plain glass, plain glass. These stained glass windows, which beautify our sanctuary today, date back to the year or early 1890s. Also, in 1884, the bell was installed in our belfry. The numbers were most likely placed there to assign pews to different families in the congregation. We have no historical records, but we believe that those pews were rented to different families. They rented the pew, and the family pew was occupied by the members of that family. If you had a large family, you needed more room. If you had a small family, you needed a smaller room for your family.
And that revenue was used for upkeep?
For the upkeep of the building, to pay the minister's salary and to cover any other expenses. Our organ is also a new addition, relatively speaking. It was built, originally the organ was built in the year 1872, but did not come to us until 1984 when it was purchased and installed right here. Collection boxes, yes, those were replaced with the present collection plates, which we use every Sunday. Also, there's a Bible marker, a white one, which was used until the year 1985. We also have 2 trays and a cup from a communion set that dates back to the year 1902. Now the bread plates are still in regular use. The rest of the cups were stolen in the year 1980. The trays were also stolen but returned in Thanksgiving weekend, the year 1981. The bell was used to call children to Sunday school or to indicate the end of the Sunday school hour. That bell dates back to the year, I would say 1898, and was used until very recently. When I first came here, they were using it too, so we'll be in the 1990s. The original, yes, comes from the State Library. And those were the signers of the petition requesting the formation of the town of Andover. That goes back to the year 1747, when the petition was granted. Also, I would like to indicate that this publication, the Connecticut, printed by the Missionary Society of Connecticut, has a short history of the town of Andover. It indicates that the name of Andover came because some of the residents or the settlers came from Andover, Massachusetts. So the town was named after the town of Andover, Massachusetts.
The cemetery that's behind this church, do you know a little bit about it? What year it dates back to?
I was told, and it's true, that the cemetery is not the oldest cemetery in town. It dates back to the year 1847, when the first grave, at least the first grave, the new cemetery was laid out northeast of the sanctuary, and the first burial was that of Charles Jones, who died on October 19th, 1847. Let me mention first of all that the beginning of this town and the church go hand in hand together. This church played a very important role in the beginning of the town, and I'm referring back to those years. Our Sunday school started, we think, around the year 1820. And ever since, we have offered a ministry of nurture to our young children. The future of this church is very promising. We're the only church in town. Not only that, but also many people of different faiths come, use the building, and eventually participate in our worship services and become active members of our church. We have a very thriving Sunday school. We have an excellent youth program, and we offer a wonderful ministry to anyone in the community. Therefore, I have great hopes that this church will continue to serve for many years to the residents of this community. And the community people have supported this church very generously too. Individuals in the community take part in supporting our food supply. I can mention the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the high school, the elementary school, and the post office. Postal employees have all provided a supply of food for the church, and those are distributed in the community to any person who has need, regardless of their faith, religion, or ethnic background. Since we're talking about the ministers, let me say that when we celebrated our 250th anniversary in the year 1997, we went over the records, and we discovered that 36 pastors and several interim ministers and seminarians have served our church in the last 250 years. 5 of those pastors have served for 10 or more years. The Reverend Samuel Lockwood, of course, our first pastor, who served this church from the year 1748 to 1791. Royal Tyler, 1792 to 1817. Alpha Miller, 1829 to 1851. John Freeman, 1855 to 1865. And Raymond Bradley Jr., 1963 to 1974. The conference room that is adjacent or right next to the church, when that first meeting house was taken down, the wood was used to build this conference room and was used for school purposes, town meetings. They had suppers, and presently we use them as a tax sale house where people donate different items and they're sold for a minimal price to anyone in the community or the surrounding communities.
I just wanted to ask you a question about this lovely quilt that's hanging on the wall in the church. It appears to be made approximately around 1976.
I believe you're right, yes. It was made by members of this parish in the year 1976, most likely in celebration of our nation's 200th anniversary, bicentennial celebration. And it pictures many of our town, church, and even state and nations' historic moments or commemorations. It is very interesting to note that this thing was done by individual members of the parish and put together. For many years it went to a home, and eventually the person returned it to another member of the church, and she brought it to us, and one individual member took it home and refinished it and sent it to the cleaners, and it's in good shape right now. It depicts, as you can see, many aspects of our community And so many of the members who have worked on it are still with us, and they're very proud of this quilt. So we have it on display right here in our sanctuary, so that will remind us of our beginning, and also of the work lovingly done by so many members of this parish. I see great hopes for the community and the church. The community is a growing community. There are many new and young families coming into town, and this church has a wonderful opportunity to serve them all. Because primarily we're the only church in town, there's no other worshiping community in the town of Andover. So persons of different faiths have to travel a distance to go to their parishes, including the neighboring town, like Hebron, Columbia, Coventry. Some people go to Bolton, and some go as far as Willimantic or Manchester to worship. The church has attracted a large number of new families. We have added to this parish in the 9 years that I've been serving as a pastor, almost 140 new members, over 140 new members. And the support we get not only from our members, but other persons in the community is outstanding. We have a very good relationship with town officers, and we undertake many projects together, like the food bank and the fuel bank, and minister to people in need, whoever or wherever they are. I do want to say a word also about our first pastor, the Reverend Samuel Lockwood, who came to this community to preach for only a few Sabbaths, but stayed for 43 years until his death. And he's presently buried in one of the many cemeteries we have in Andover, the Center Street Cemetery, as it is called. He served very faithfully, and he was a very much liked pastor of this church. On behalf of the First Congregational Church, United Church of Andover, I would like to wish God's blessings, not only upon the church, but upon the entire community of Andover.
We have a lot of dresses donated from the Post Farm, and this was actually a wedding dress that was used 200 years ago, and it was very fancy for the time. It's kind of surprising that it's not white, but it is silk, and it's kind of falling apart, which is a shame, but it is a wedding dress. And back then they would use their fanciest outfit for their wedding dress. And so this is one of our of the collection, and we do have other dresses throughout the museum that you will see as we move around.
As the result of a highly damaging fire in the fall of 1937, a committee was formed to determine if fire protection for the town was needed. Soon after February of 1938, a new organization of 6 men voted for the name of Andover Volunteer Fire Department. Let's listen as Scott Yeomans describes some of the fire department photos.
Here we have Dave Hudak and Buster Hutchinson posing with the first emergency truck that the Andover Fire Department had. The fire department was incorporated in 1838, and initially they had only one truck, which was this pumper here that was purchased. It was a 1.5-ton Ford chassis, had 150 gallons of water on it, and a pump capable of pumping 500 gallons per minute. One of the problems, obviously, being 150 gallons of water doesn't go very far when you're trying to put out a fire. So eventually they decided they needed a tanker to bring extra water along. The first tanker that the fire department actually built or converted was this old oil truck that they got from the Radcliffe Oil Company. This is John Yeomans and Buster Hutchinson working out at a fire up in Hebron. That served until 1957, which time they replaced it with a much more modern fire truck tanker. Also, early on, they decided they needed something to carry additional tools and things with, and they purchased this Kelly car. It was purchased from another fire department and used, again, just an auxiliary truck. It didn't carry any water or any pump or anything, but it carried the ladders and tools and buckets and chains and things used for various firefighting activities. Down here we have a graduating class from the American Red Cross. Early on, the members of the fire department realized the need for medical training and participated in a number of classes with the American Red Cross over the years. This is the firehouse as it looked in 1947. Not much different than when it was originally constructed as a firehouse. Again, this was Sackett's store on a photograph over there. But again, it was converted and used as a firehouse. It was used right up until we built the new firehouse up in the center of town. It had several additions added over to the left-hand side of the photograph here over the years. Along with the fire department, a number of women in town got together and decided to create the Women's Auxiliary to the fire department in 1964 to help out as much as they could, both financially and at fires with refreshments and so forth. The original Women's Auxiliary disbanded in 1980. A number of years later, another group called the Auxiliary was created to do the similar functions, and is still in existence.
This is the current home of the Andover Volunteer Fire Department, located on School Road next to the Town Hall. This complex, built in 1990, can hold many fire apparatus, has sleeping quarters for its crew, recreation room, and much more.
The dam under construction, it was built with a solid concrete core. I believe it was 3 or 4 feet thick at the base and 3 or 4 feet thick at the top. It took 8 railroad car loads of concrete to complete that portion of it. You see the forms being built here, and then again from the other side here, this is where the spillway was. Up here, as the lake had begun to fill, you can see they did not try to clear the bottom whatsoever. It was just whatever was there. They cut off the trees and left everything else there. Here, the gate had been closed for 3 days when that photograph was taken. As the water rose up, they had both a house over here that was in the water and the red barn, white in this picture, but always known as the red barn, again was underwater, and they had to take and actually move the barn back here onto the dry land, and the house they just plain took down. This is after the lake was completed. This was taken 1947, the time of our centennial celebration. You can see the red barn looking much more like a red barn, and of course the island and an early cottage. Another photograph of the dam as it was completed and beginning to fill. This is the actual spillway. You see the face of the dam was fitted up with rocks and things to counteract the action of the water. Then over here we have the Corporation Cottage. It's a house that's not too far from Bazzola Road on Lake Road. It was built as the office for the Lake Corporation and served in that capacity for many years. Now it's a private residence.
This is Andover Lake as it looks today in 1998, with scenic sights at every angle. What makes the lake so special is that no motorboats are allowed on the water, making less chance of oil and gas spills, as well as the noise pollution caused by motorboats. What you will hear is the sound of nature, sails flapping as the wind direction is changed, and the sound of beachgoers enjoying a day at the local beach. There is so much to do, like volleyball, swimming lessons, swimming out to the raft with friends, and cooling off by diving into the shimmering water. But I guess the most enjoyable activity is just to plain relax, catch some rays and socialize. And at the end of it all, when the day is done and the last sail is secured and the cooling breeze breaks from the west, some of the most beautiful sunsets in the state can be seen in Andover's western skies, making each day different as Mother Nature paints another picture.
You see, in 1896, the Andover Public Library was created from a library that had existed before that, but due to an act of the legislature, it was created as a new public free library. It used the conference house down at the church for many years as the library building. But in 1919, when Elliot Skinner passed on, he was a son-in-law of Daniel Burnup, the clockmaker, and lived at the Burnup Brook Farm. Anyways, he left a codicil in his will that left some money to build a new library building to be known as the Burnup Skinner Memorial Building. Due to a number of things going on, the money was not released until the mid-1920s. But anyhow, in 1927, the building that we now use for our library was built. It was started in the spring and it was completed by the fall.
This painting is done by Gordon McDonald, and it is the old post office on Center Street. And the lower painting is an unknown artist, but it is of the church in Andover, the Congregational Church. For more information on Andover's museum here at the Old Town Hall, you can come down to the museum, and we'd love to see you there. We're open on Saturdays from 1 to 4. On Sundays too, and we have a lot of literature at the museum available, books of old Andover, and we have some books about the library. We have 2 Andover books of the history of Andover. We have some pottery too, and coloring books for kids. So we do have a lot of things for each age level, hopefully.
The Andover Historical Museum has many more points of interest which have not been covered, unfortunately, due to the lack of time for making this one-hour broadcast. And I recommend that if you have the time to come down to the museum, it would be worth your while for young and old to take a peek into the past and to see how life was led in more simpler times.
The Historical Society under Scott Yeoman's leadership has just done a fantastic job as they prepared really for this 150th year celebration, not only in the preparation of a written history, which will be a permanent record. A lot of research and effort went into that on Scott's part, but also the museum that has been established here in town is just a highly professional job. It was done with some limited resources from the town budget, and then considerable expense from the Historical Society's budget as well. And while that might have been planned as an anniversary year kind of museum, I think everyone agrees that the Old Town Hall, where it's located, that's an appropriate location for a permanent museum to give youngsters and others in town some background on where we came from in terms of Andover's not only 150th year history, but back in the founding of the Ecclesiastical Society, which had celebrated its 250th year. So I think it's a valuable, valuable resource. And as one goes through that, I'm sure I know that there are a number of historical trivia, if you will. I guess the one that comes to mind, which I can't remember the details, but it has to do with the little grave where the horse is buried up on Boston Hill Road, and there's a marker there, and of course we're rich in history as far as Revolutionary War times with Rochambeau's movement through the community. So there's a lot of interesting things, and the written history itself is quite fascinating to know how things developed over the years, and the agricultural, the animal pound, for instance, which was reconstructed by DOT recently this past year on Route 6, was an enclosure where loose farm animals would be corralled until an owner would come to pick them up. That might be anything from a goat, hog, or horse or whatever. And that little enclosure has been reconstructed in the original dimensions. I think it probably looks a lot better today than it did back then, because the gentleman that did it did a magnificent job of stone wall construction. 150 years in Connecticut does not appear to be a long period of time as we look around the area and see 200, 250, 300-year celebrations. But Andover, the roots of Andover really date back over 250 years ago. And people come into Andover and recognize it as really a beautiful, beautiful area and a beautiful place to live. I think sometimes we take for granted the landscape and the beauty that we enjoy here. But it is, the Lake District is very scenic. We still are fortunate to have the rural character. We still have farm type, they're not big farm operations, but we hope that we can maintain those farm areas as open space, at least, even if they're not being operated as farms. And we would like to attract people that can appreciate this kind of environment and have things like the museum and other things that would be attractions for people that do not enjoy this kind of environment that we have on our doorstep every day. So that's our hope, and I think the people generally that live in Andover want to try to maintain the beauty and the character that we presently enjoy.
I think that's very true. Thank you.
Andover has many hidden treasures which need to be hunted and uncovered. Pieces of history ranging from the Revolutionary War to old homesteads, cider mills, right down to the 150th anniversary itself. You can take a drive around town to see them, or just stop at the museum and learn about all the things you've taken for granted all these years.